Good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening. It's a great pleasure to be here today to celebrate the launch of this report and to involve a panel in some thoughtful discussion about this report, Pathways to Net Zero, the Impact of Clean Energy Research. At Elsevier, we aim to publish one analytic report a year on an important topic that covers global concerns in research. Previous recent reports have included artificial intelligence, disaster science, and 2 on gender in research. With COP26 coming up, with our company's commitment to SDGs and to climate action, about a year ago, we decided that the next report we would produce would be on pathways to net zero. Building on our deep links with the energy research community, we established an advisory group to guide this work and to inform our analysis on what would be the most helpful contribution to the field. A year on marks the launch of this report, with thanks to UNEP and the Times Higher for providing this opportunity to launch the report, and to all of those who contributed to the report, both internally and also in the research world wider. To illuminate the launch, I'm really delighted we're joined by a global panel. Professor Wang, Vice Dean of the Energy Institute, Shanghai Jiao University, Professor Thornley, Director of Energy and Bioproducts Research at Aston University, and Professor Clarke, Research Director of the Center of Global Sustainability at the University of Maryland. However, before we get into a panel discussion, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Basak Candemir, who will give you a short presentation on some of the key findings from the report. Basak, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lesley, and thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Basak Candemir, and I'm heading our analytical services team for Europe and emerging markets. Today, I'm excited to be sharing some of the highlights from our report, Pathways to Net Zero, the Impact of Clean Energy Research, just ahead of COP26. Our report is a humble but genuine effort to contribute to the discussions around climate change from the research perspective. The report was designed to support evidence-led policy decisions and actions by providing a snapshot of clean energy research. Before moving on to presenting the highlights, I would like to acknowledge that this report is a collaborative effort of many internal and external colleagues who are mentioned in the report. The analysis provided in this report are mainly based on the 1.6 million publications from Scopus, which we refer to as net zero energy, denoted as you see on the screen. The term net zero in the context of clean energy started to appear in Scopus in early 2000s. However, the term itself is not enough to capture all the publications relevant to this broad area. Our first challenge in this report has been defining the scope of the net zero energy. So rather than creating a brand new search query, we built our publication set on Elsevier's existing work on sustainable development goals, which I've been developing over the years in collaboration with experts. Our starting point was SDG 7, which is on clean and affordable energy. However, during the course of our interaction with our advisory group, we have decided to include energy-relevant publications from SDG 13 on climate energy, which allowed us to build a more robust publication set, which includes research on carbon removal, as well as clean energy. Our data analysis covers the period 2001 to 2020, which is 2020 is the most recent complete year of data for Scopus, and early 2000s is when we start to observe the term net zero in the context of clean energy, which is why we focused on this period. To have a more granular view of the net zero energy field, we use Sci-Val topic clusters. All publications in Scopus are classified into over 1,500 mutually exclusive topic clusters based on citation linkages between publications. Topic clusters are denoted by the 3 most relevant key phrases from the title, abstract, and author keywords of the publications. The topic cluster view, as opposed to a top-down classification, allowed us to have a more diverse view of the area bottom-up. A final note on the methodology is that next to the publications from Scopus, we analyzed more than 800,000 direct patents from LexisNexis patent site and also brought in news and policy update data thanks to Plumex and Overton. Our report is structured into 3 sections. Section 1 presents a variety of bibliometric analysis showing the large-scale trends in net zero energy research. Section 2 presents the interviews we have conducted with key opinion leaders. And finally, in Section 3, we present a number of outlook questions which we believe can be further explored. Throughout the report, we have also incorporated insights from our advisory group. As it's not possible to present all the findings of the report in this session, I would like to present some key findings and thoughts in the next slides. Our analysis indicates that net zero energy research contributed to 5% of all publications in 2020, as opposed to the 1% in 2001. This is an impressive growth, showing that the research community has stepped up to this challenge, as have governments and funders. China has played an important role in the field. In the analysis period, China contributed to 24% of all publications, and we also indicate in our report that Chinese funding agencies were leading in terms of funded publications. Most of the top countries publishing in net zero energy are also those countries that are publishing most globally. However, we also see some exceptions, such as Malaysia, Denmark, and Singapore, which have contributed to at least 1% of global net zero energy publications. As we have indicated before, we use a topic cluster view to analyze the field. In the analysis period, the largest topic cluster was around lithium-ion batteries, which also had the largest growth rate over the analysis period. However, most prominent topic clusters in terms of publication output were not the same throughout the analysis period. For example, in 2001, a topic cluster around fusion research was the most published topic cluster, going down to 18th place in 2020. Conversely, in 2001, a topic cluster on solar cells was the 18th most published topic cluster, going up to number 4 in 2020. Research collaboration, both nationally and internationally, is essential in tackling grand challenges such as climate change. Our analysis indicates that the share of net zero energy publications with international collaboration has increased, going from 31% in 2001 to 45% in 2020. And we see countries such as Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Switzerland, and Canada demonstrating very high shares of international collaboration. The International Energy Agency's Net Zero by 2050 report highlights the need for greater international collaboration among countries to ensure that developing economies have financing and technologies they need to reach net zero in time. Despite an increase in international collaboration, we have observed that only a small proportion of the research is conducted in or by the Global South. Collectively, Global South countries contributed to 15% of net zero energy research, which is below the USA, China, and other countries. And our message here is not that the Global South countries are not doing enough, as they face a unique set of challenges in building up net zero energy research. The discussion we'd like to contribute is how Global North countries are doing in supporting North-South collaboration, which can help build local capacity and pave the way for more North-South collaboration. Next to collaboration between countries, it is important that there is collaboration among disciplines in solving grand challenges. In our report, we looked into interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity to understand the interaction between different disciplines. Interdisciplinarity, also referred to as conceptual diversity, looks into the diversity of disciplines in the cited references of research. And multidisciplinarity, also referred to as collaborative diversity, looks into the diversity of the disciplines of the authors. Our findings indicate that net zero energy research overall tends to be focused on a few disciplines. Most of the largest topic clusters show average levels of interdisciplinarity, whereas smaller topic clusters in areas such as biofuels, carbon capture, or energy economics are more diverse. In order to understand how close net zero energy research is to application, we looked into research levels. Through an algorithm, publications in Scopus are classified into 4 research levels, ranging from basic research to applied technology. What we have observed is that overall share of applied technology publications in net zero energy research increased by 20 percentage points, going from about 40% in 2001 to about 60% in 2020. Of the most published countries in net zero energy research, Singapore had the highest share of basic research, followed by Switzerland and Japan. Research levels also differ across topic clusters. In the most published topic cluster relating to lithium-ion batteries, research is still farther away from applied technology, whereas in a topic cluster such as wind turbines, almost all publications are in applied technology. The final highlight from our report that I want to present today is the uptake of net zero energy in policy and use. This is the first time that we publish on policy uptake of research. Through using data from Overton, we looked into the extent in which net zero energy research publications are being cited by policy documents. And through PlumX, we looked into the uptake of research in use. While there are limitations to the data, such as language and coverage, our analysis indicates that net zero energy research received slightly less attention from policymakers and slightly more attention for online use compared to other research fields. The chart you'll see here shows that research from smaller countries, such as the Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria, Denmark, and Belgium, tend to receive more news mentions and policy uptake. Absence of countries such as China, Korea, and Japan are likely to be driven by the language bias in the databases. In this last chart, you will see, sorry, it's a bit faint, but there are linkages, you see the linkages between research and policy to the extent we can observe it. On the right side, we see countries whose research is being cited. And on the left side, we see countries whose policy documents are citing research. And next to countries, we also see intergovernmental organizations and the EU. What we observe is that net zero energy research is taken up by the government agencies, such as the European Commission and the US government, as well as by intergovernmental and organizations and think tanks, such as World Bank, Wuppertal Institute, and IPCC. We have just heard some highlights from net zero energy research, such as the growth of the field from 1% to 5% in the analysis period, with a strong lead from China, and that there is room for including Global South despite increasing international collaboration. The report itself presents more findings, which we hope can contribute to the relevant discussions. However, we acknowledge that this is not an area that we can address with one report. We have identified further questions that we think would be relevant to address and look forward to joining the discussion and collaborating with partners in investigating the area. I would like to thank you all for listening. And before handing over to Lesley, I would like to point out that our report is now available for download through the URL link indicated at the bottom of this page. Thank you, and I will now hand over to Lesley.
Thank you, Basak. That was a real tour de force. It was really difficult for Basak to pick out the subject areas she might cover in this. There's a real wealth of data in the report, and I really commend it to all of you. But now I want to turn to our panel. Professor Thornley, could I start with you? You've had the opportunity to see this report before it was published. What do you think is the most important insight in our report and why?
Okay, for me, the biggest insight and the biggest surprise actually was the extent to which the work being put out is not actually particularly interdisciplinary. I think for the last 20 years, all I've been hearing from funders is interdisciplinary, needed for energy research. I think many of us have reviewed many proposals that claim to be carrying out interdisciplinary research. And yet here we have the hard data that shows where this work is being cited. And we see that we are not breaking across those silos and we're not making those transitions. I have to caveat that and say that I am pleased, obviously, that biofuels is singled out as one of the areas where this is happening. That is my own area of research. So obviously I'm immensely pleased at that. And I think, coming from that background, we really see in the bio area the need to bring on board land ecosystems, but also engineering disciplines and economics side by side. I think there are huge benefits from that when we need to look at sustainable solutions in the round. And it's just really disappointing to see that that is not happening across the board in the other sectors. So that was my biggest surprise, the biggest insight, and the thing I think we need to work hardest on going forward.
Thank you. I was also surprised by that data, having worked for a funder. So Professor Wang, can I now turn to you and ask you the same question? What do you think was the most important insight from your point of view in this report, and why?
Yeah, what I see from the report that in the year between 2000 to 2010, there are started some researches of net zero energy research. But then after the next 10 years, there is so much increase in net zero energy research. And now I think for the next 30 or 40 years, we are expecting to have more because it's facing for carbon neutral. It will be more and more hot topic. In China, actually, start from 2016, I saw from the report, we are continuously increasing publication in some areas like lithium battery, solar cells, organic lunging cycles, and heat pumps, and wind energy, and new energy systems. So this is mostly due to the support from the National Natural Science Foundation of China, and also the Ministry of Education. So in this case, a lot of researchers of net zero energy researchers, and also the Chinese policy for energy saving and enforced renewable energy law. So in this case, more and more people just very interested. And the research map in energy, I think, especially in China, United States, and India. So there are, you selected some most concentrated research areas. And this is very important, I think, as information. And what I got other informations is that the international collaboration publications is going up, and the multidisciplinary researches are increasing, and some companies' involvement, the corporate involvement in publication is also significant. And academic corporate joint publications is increasing year and by year, but the share is decreasing. That means this kind of new technologies now more and more mature, possibly, so more and more in real application. So other things for the interviews with experts, because you have some commands from experts, I think this could bring a lot of interesting information for leaders to know quickly into the fantastical research area of net zero energy.
Brilliant, thank you. That's great. So you can see from what Professor Wang said, there's a lot more detail in the report than Basak was able to cover in her talk. Now can I turn to you, Professor Clarke? What do you think from your review of the report were the most important insight in the report, and why?
Well, let me make a couple of comments. So first off, I just want to say before talking about what was most important, that I just think having the report is really important. So as funders and as researchers think about what we should be working on, this report gives us a lot more sense about what's needed, what's missing, and what's moving forward. I also wanted to say quickly that I think some of the outcomes are really nice. I think the increase in international collaboration is great to see, and this notion of going from 1% to 5% of total publications is great. So there's a lot of good news in there. But I thought about two things that I might focus on. One of them is already hit, which is interdisciplinary, and I think that's really critical. So I won't go into that because I agree with Dr. Thornley that that's really a critical issue. I think one of the insights is, which is potentially really not unexpected, but I think confirms some concerns we have, is that the research isn't in the global south. And that's important because as we try and solve this problem, it's actually a global problem. And one of the issues that we consistently find as we try and take action is that many countries don't have the capacity in country to address these issues, and they have to import it from out country. And that's just not the same. the folks who come in from out of country don't understand the issues in a country, they don't understand the perspectives as well, and when they're done, they leave. And what's really important for us to solve this problem is really to be increasing capacity in country from people who are really vested in the country and who are trusted to be able to address these problems. And so seeing that we don't have, that we're not seeing, I guess it's only 15% from the global south, I think that's a concern. It's not a very easily solvable concern, but I think that's something that we need to be thinking about and working hard on if we really want to get after this.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So actually from the three comments from the panelists, you can see that actually there are areas where the world has really stepped up to the mark on net zero energy production. There are some areas of concern that funders, researchers, and the ecosystem need to think about. Now I want to turn to you, Professor Wang, with respect to China and net zero energy, where the performance was absolutely extraordinary. 24% of all global publications coming from China over this period. If you look forward, what do you see the research and innovation priorities for China in the forward period? Thank you, Professor Wang.
Yeah, China actually now we have enforced policy, so 2030 carbon peak and 2060 for carbon neutral. So this is the biggest issue for all Chinese government people and also for normal Chinese. So we already start to say 2025, no fossil fuel energy will be 20%, and 2030, it will be 25%, but at 2060, it will be 80%. So this is actually for the 2060 for carbon neutral. So there is a long way to go, but from 2030 carbon peak to 2060, in the 30 years, we will increase more and more wind energy and solar PV. So actually 2030, the wind energy and the solar PV will be 1.2 billion kilowatt. So China now, actually we have solar PV for about 280 gigawatt and wind energy installed for 260 gigawatt. So the very, very strong in renewable energy and especially developed in the last 5 years. So for academics, actually, we made more focus because we are turning to the point of 2060 for the carbon neutral. So the first thing is, most important thing is energy efficiency. The second is to have more PV and applied, so BIPV and also so PV related batteries for energy storage. And then wind energy and related with hydrogen, especially. And then for the storage. And then energy storage to have electrical battery, thermal battery, or electrical carbon neutral fuel. So this is another possibility for the energy storage. And then the biomass and carbon sink and even CO2 capture. So mainly in China, actually, for carbon neutral. For industry, we need more high energy efficiency products. And we need also heat pumps. And industrial heating and using of low-grade thermal energy, like heat recovery, actually. For buildings, energy saving and the use of renewable becomes more and more important, and especially BIPVs becomes more and more common for Chinese people. For transportations, electric vehicles and electric cars, even carbon neutral fuels. So all this, I think, is the most key issues we are facing for the carbon neutral 2060. Thank you.
The challenges for the Chinese research community are not running out. There's a whole host of research challenges for the Chinese research community, indeed the whole world's research community, to continue to tackle as we move towards really realising net zero. Can I turn to Professor Clarke now? Now you dipped the question first time round, so I'm going to come back to it. You passed because Patricia had raised the issue of interdisciplinarity. But given where you sit in the Sustainability Institute, I wonder if you'd just reflect on the importance of interdisciplinary research towards net zero into the future.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And it goes without saying that it's critical, but I will go ahead and say it. It's absolutely critical. So this is a big problem that really touches all aspects of society, and it touches all disciplines. Actually, as I think back to when this report was starting, and there were questions about how exactly to define research, it became very challenging because, frankly, net zero applies to so much. You end up covering an enormous amount of, potentially, you could end up covering an enormous amount of literature. But there's no question that technology and technology research is fundamental. We wouldn't be making the progress and making the commitments we're making today for mitigation if it weren't for advances in solar cells, advances in batteries, advances in wind, and so forth. All of those are really paving the way to making big commitments, but it's not just about technology by any stretch whatsoever. So it's about what you can do in countries as you're moving towards electric cars, but only the rich can afford them. What are the equity issues that arise when you may have policies that put extra prices on emitting vehicles? What about heat pumps? So it's about equity issues. It's about adoption there. What do you do about the millions of people who are employed in coal industries in countries that rely on fossil fuels as you're moving away from those, moving to low carbon energy? And what sorts of institutional structures that you need to manage electricity grids that might have large amounts of renewable energy on those, not just physical, but actually institutional structures are needed. And how do you think about chicken and egg issues about developing and moving forward on technologies like hydrogen? You need to get an infrastructure in there to actually move forward on it. Same with electric cars, charging infrastructure. That's a policy question. And then, there's questions about the intersection of climate and a much broader set of issues. And let's be honest about it. For many or most people in the world, climate is not the number one issue. Issues, or for governments, issues are going to be air pollution, water scarcity or water quality, health, national security, energy security, food security, energy access, and so forth. Competitiveness. These are all the questions that folks are asking. And it's only through the linkage of climate to those that you have a chance of really moving forward. And so that's going to be really, really critical as well. And then there's all sorts of policy questions about what sorts of actions are cities taking, businesses taking, and so forth. And how do we think about sharing best practices? So I wanted to say all that to say that we think about technology. Hey, we're getting better technology. Let's improve technology. It's not just about technology. It's about a much broader suite of issues about how do you get technology in place. But it's also about the whole idea that mitigation is only one thing that we care about, and all these other priorities that really, really matter. And I guess, that's the way we have to think about solutions, is going to be at the intersection of different disciplines. And it's going to be at the intersection of different goals. And only that can only be done by interdisciplinary research. And I'd also, I guess, just make one other note that I think it's not just about finding the solutions in our papers and in our research. It's also about creating an interdisciplinary community of folks who understand multiple perspectives, creating a cadre of researchers who actually can provide guidance that has that interdisciplinary perspective. It can actually then come at this, what is inherently fundamentally one of the most interdisciplinary problems. They can come at it that way. So it's not just about the research itself. It's about the community of researchers that we're leading. So I think interdisciplinary research is absolutely critical. I agree with Patricia. It was a little disappointing to see, and actually a little bit surprising, but I'm pretty hopeful that that's going to be changing.
Okay, so given your position, we'll look to you to form this new cadre of people who are really
we're working on it.
Research, as we all have to do. And then, Patricia, I want to turn to you. Everybody has pulled out the fact that we've seen a growth in international collaboration over time, but actually maybe a concern about the collaboration with the Global South. I wonder if you'd just like to reflect on that, given your research experiences.
Yeah, I will. But I think also, actually, the growth in international collaboration was not as good as I felt it needed to be. It wasn't significantly above average for other disciplines. So I think that is of concern when we look at the fact that, for example, across Europe, we have big multinational energy programs, and yet still we're not getting the level of international collaboration that I think is needed here. But let's look at an example with a specific focus on, the sort of climate agenda. We have got so far in terms of our emissions of CO2 that everyone now knows that if we want to do 1.5 degrees C, we need to be doing greenhouse gas removal. One of the most advanced technologies for that is around biomass to energy with carbon capture and storage, BECCS. And if ever there was a technology that needed international collaboration, this is it. Because there are only certain parts of the world where the geological storage is appropriate, and yet you have other parts of the world where you have the highest levels of productivity in the resource being produced. Huge engineering challenges, huge geographical issues around the economics on this and the accounting frameworks that we have in place for the emissions themselves, technical, commercial, and all sorts of other collaboration desperately needed on this, and it isn't happening. We're merrily talking about these solutions and putting them into modeling. It was interesting that one of the most interdisciplinary areas was energy and economics, who are actually looking for this data from elsewhere, but we're not actually progressing the engineering practicalities of this, which is necessary to build it. So there are disappointments across the board in terms of international collaboration and those big infrastructure needs. But when we look at the interaction with the global south, it is frankly dire. We cannot afford as a global society to repeat the same mistakes in every single country around the world every time we look at a slightly different context. We can't keep reinventing the wheel. We have to learn from the mistakes that we've made, and we have to learn from the progress that we've made by and large in the more industrialized nations to date. But look at the challenge we have with population. Look at the challenge we have with the differential in carbon emissions between the more prosperous nations and the low and middle income countries. We all know what's looming. The growth is coming in sub-Saharan Africa, in South America, and in Southeast Asia. The megacities are going to be there in the next 30 years, and we are doing precious little to transfer any existing knowledge or to work with key countries in order to address this. If I speak from my own perspective in the UK, I was pleased this week to see that we are going to try to aim again for 0.7% of GDP to go to the overseas development aid, because a lot of that research funding for work with developing countries from a UK perspective actually comes from the aid budget. And I personally have spent a lot of time this year unpicking finances on cancelled projects and cancelled investments when I could have been spending time doing research that would actually benefit people. So I've got a really big plea here that we have better structures with long-term vision in place for collaborations that actually work between the industrialized nations and those with high levels of research output in this area and the global south. If we want to look at a future where we have food security globally, where we're mitigating issues around migration, etc., those are going to be so much easier to deal with if we actually get these frameworks and the understanding and the research infrastructure in place in advance.
Thank you. So actually, while we've got data in our report, I think we've heard the importance from our three panelists, drawn from three different perspectives on why data and then informed opinion is so critical to making sure the world of research makes its contribution towards net zero. But I want to turn to one final question. I'm going to give each panelist 1 minute because we're up against the clock. I'd like to turn first to Professor Clarke. In 1 minute, what brief message would you like to send to the decision makers at COP26?
Well, I think this will be informed by the report, but more general message than I would actually make. So I think, I guess what I would say is it's great we're seeing increased commitments. We do need more commitments. But even as these national decision makers are getting together, it's the ability to actually make more commitments and then to actually execute on commitments that's going to matter. And that really comes from an all of society approach. It's not just a federal approach. So ultimately addressing climate is something that requires not just national governments. It's about cities, states, businesses, civil society, universities, and university researchers and people. And in my own country, in the US, our current commitment of 50 to 52% would not have happened if it wasn't for all the action that's been taken by cities, businesses, states, civil society over the last 4 years to put in place, and actually for decades, to put in place the environment to be successful. So I guess my message is let's work not just on creating more commitments, not just on national policies, but let's work on creating the environment for success where we actually can put in and execute on those policies.
Okay, the same question to you, Professor Wang. In a minute, what would you tell the decision makers at COP26?
So I think net zero energy is now the main research stream in the world, considering for the climate changes and green development, especially for carbon neutral. That's a target in China. So what our president said, if we promised, we will realize. So this is a very important issue in China for the net zero energy and especially for carbon neutral development. I think another thing what I want to say is that there are much developing gaps so between countries because for the net zero. So in this case, we need a lot of collaborations. So United Nations could bridge for this kind of gaps for the international collaborations. And also that for academical and cooperative companies, I think this kind of collaboration is very important in China. For university professors, we have very close partnership with the industry. So try to bridge, try to make the knowledge very quickly to be transferred to manufacture. So in this case, we could practice to make some new technologies more affordable for people. So this is for United Nations SDG 7. I think it's for energy. That's a very, very important issue. So I think all this maybe for could be very important for the key future development.
Thank you. And Professor Thornley, the last word on this question is yours. What would you tell the decision makers at COP26?
Thank you, and I'll keep it short. We need to commit long-term investment to research collaborations with the global south that actually empower solutions that are not just sustainable, but also just, equitable, and acceptable.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I'm afraid we're running out of time, so it's just up to me now to close this session. I'd like to thank all of you, the audience, for listening, our insightful panelists, Professor Wang, Thornley, and Clarke, for such thoughtful and thought-provoking contributions, to Basak, Candemir for an interesting presentation, and actually to everyone who's contributed to this report, and it was a real team effort. And finally, could I encourage you all to go and look at the report, and this is forthright publicity, because actually the report is there for you to read, digest, and think about how you use that in your deliberations about the central importance of research and innovation in meeting pathways to net zero. The report is now duly launched. I'd like to thank you all, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. Go find that report. Thank you very much indeed.